For the 15th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we hear the parable of the Good Samaritan, and it's an iconic story, one that really challenges the hearts, I think, of all believers, and for many people becomes sort of a blueprint of how to live their lives going forward. And I think there's two things really to highlight and bring together a deeper understanding of the parable and the whole of our readings. One of them is just the issue at hand between the Israelites and the Samaritans, and just a reminder that at the time of Jesus there was a certain understanding that those of the southern tribes, Judah especially, those who lived in and around Jerusalem, let's just put it that way, they still had this purity of the Jewish faith. And the Samaritans were from the north, and they had, intermarried and, mixed with the foreign nations. And so, they didn't have a purity of faith. And so they were really at odds with one another. And largely they were enemies. So, Jesus sets up this story already from the beginning, with this awareness that, there's this division between the two. So that's one thing, recognizing the division between the Jews and the Samaritans. But the other thing, I think, is, the division between, the law as it's written and the law as it's written in our hearts. And, both are important in their own ways and in their own times, but, Jesus is really highlighting, the need to turn to the law that's written on our hearts. And so, you get down to the nitty-gritty of the story, and I've heard so much about this story, and, some of it may be true and some of it maybe ought to be true, but, even the reality that, the Samaritan was on the road to Jericho, and, it's one of the most dangerous roads in ancient Israel, and it was just well known for robbers and things like that. So it's a dangerous place, and some people might even say, well, the guy shouldn't have even been on the road to Jericho. He put himself in that situation. But the other interesting thing was Jericho was kind of like, the summer, living place of the priests and the Levites. So they made that path quite a few times. And so they're on that journey, and presumably the priests and the Levites are coming up to the temple to minister. That's what their job was. They would come up and minister in the temple for a few weeks a year, and the priest passes on one side, the Levite passes on one side, and I try to tell people, these aren't Catholic priests. These are the Jewish priests of the temple. Jesus isn't calling me out any worse than he's calling anybody else out. But it's kind of an indictment in that way anyway, because they're leaders in the faith. And the fact that they avoid this man in his suffering, says something about their own hearts. And it's possible they were caught up in the purity laws. They might have thought that they wouldn't have been able to minister in the temple because, the guy was so beat up. They might have thought he was dead, and that would have been an obstacle to their ministry. So, maybe they genuinely thought, according to the law, they wouldn't be able to do their job for the rest of the people if they encountered this man. But, regardless, Jesus points back to the law written on our hearts. The law that the Samaritan, the enemy of the Jews, was able to recognize that this is a person in need of help. And it didn't matter who they were, but he was going to cross that barrier of hostility and reach out and provide the help that the man genuinely needed. So, it's fascinating. You even look back to the first reading where Moses calls out to the people, like, guys, it's not that hard. The law of God is not across the ocean. You don't need somebody else to go out and get it. God has written that law in your hearts, and you just need to let the walls that are there to break down and just step out in faith and recognize that that person is not your enemy. Doesn't matter who they are, they're not your enemy. But the call of the Lord is to provide for others in their time of need. So allowing His grace, His mercy to soften our hearts. And not to go down this whole path, but why aren't our hearts softened to the needs of other people? Because we're not aware sometimes of how much the Lord has really helped us. So, spending the time before Him and recognizing in our own humility, holy smokes, God, you've literally provided me everything, is often the turn of our own hearts to recognize our need to provide for others in theirs. So, let your hearts be softened a little bit more this week, and maybe reflect a little bit on who's the Samaritan in your life, or who's the Jew in your life, just like, the division there. Who do you need to reach out to that, you ordinarily wouldn't, or what are those situations where you ordinarily avoid the difficult task of providing for others in their time of need?